Hello everybody and welcome back. I did release this video on Saturday and unfortunately we had some technical difficulties, so this is a re-release and it's the complete and utter story of Seraphine Long. And she was kidnapped by a Bigfoot. She was a Native American girl and it was around the 1870s when it happened. And here's the story. So in 1871 near Harrison Lake in British Columbia, it was reported that a 17-year-old girl, a Native American girl named Seraphine Long, was snatched against her will and forcibly carried off by a young male Bigfoot. Now, for several miles, she was impelled into the darkness of the forest. Scared and confused, she was led by her captor across the Harrison River to a remote part of the wilderness. There, near a small rock shelter, her journey finally ended. In the shelter, to her dismay, she found herself in the presence of two older and larger Bigfoot, one male and one female. Apparently, her younger abductor was their offspring, and this terrified her, of course, and filled her mind with dreadful thoughts of becoming the unwilling captive of this fearsome Bigfoot family. She claimed upon her return that she'd been held prisoner for a period of 1 year. But then the story starts to become unclear, and we're left with two possible endings. One ending says the reason she was returned was that she aggravated the creatures so much that they let her return to a tribal home, while the other claims that she became ill and was allowed to leave. Now, the same ending also claims that when she returned, she was found to be pregnant with a Bigfoot baby, which died a few days after being born. This is Seraphine's story in her own words. Now, I'm really sorry if I get the pronunciations wrong. I don't know the language at all. I was walking towards home one day, many years ago, carrying a big bundle of cedar roots and thinking of the young brave Koalak, which meant thunderbolt, that I was soon to marry. Suddenly, at a place where the bush grew close and thick, beside the trail, a long arm shot out and a big hairy hand was pressed over my mouth. And then I was suddenly lifted up into the arms of a young sasquatch. I was terrified. I fought and struggled with all my might. In those days I was strong, but it was no good. The wild man was as powerful as a young bear. Holding me easily under one arm, with his other hand he smeared tree gum over my eyes, sticking them shut tightly so that I could not see where he was taking me. He then lifted me to his shoulder and started to run. He ran on and on for a very long time, up and down hills, through thick brush, and across many streams, never stopping to rest. Once he had to swim a river, and then perhaps I could have gotten away, but I was so afraid of being drowned that I held on tightly, with my arms about his neck. Although I was frightened, I could not but admire his easy breathing, his great strength and speed of foot. After reaching the other side of the river, he began to climb and climb higher. Presently the air became very cold. I could not see, but I guessed that we were close to the top of the mountain. At last the Sasquatch stopped hurrying. Then he stooped over and moved slowly, as if feeling his way along the tunnel. Presently he laid me down very gently, and I heard people talking in a strange tongue that I could not understand. And the young giant next wiped the sticky tree gum from my eyelids, and I was able to look around me. I sat up, and I saw that I was in a great big cave, and the floor was covered with animal skins, soft to the touch, and much better preserved than we can preserve them. A small fire was in the middle of the floor, and that gave off all the light that there was. And as my eyes became accustomed to the gloom, I saw that beside the young giant who had brought me to the cave, there were two other wild people, a man and a woman. And to me, a young girl, they seemed very, very old, but they were active and friendly, and later I learned that they were the parents of the young Sasquatch who had stolen me. When they all came over to look at me, I cried and I asked them to let me go, and they just smiled and shook their heads. And from then on, I was kept a close prisoner. Not once would they let me go out of that cave. Always one of them stayed with me when the other two were away. They fed me well on roots and fish and meat. After I'd learned a few words of their tongue, which is not unlike the Douglas dialect, I asked the young giant how he caught and killed the deer and the mountain goats and the sheep that he often brought into the cave. He smiled, opening and closing his big hairy hands, and I guess he just laid in wait, and when an animal got close enough, he leapt, he caught it, and he choked it to death. He was certainly big enough, quick enough, and strong enough to do so. When I'd been in the cave for about a year with him, I began to feel very sick and weak, and I could not eat much. I told this to the young Sasquatch, and I pleaded with him to take me back to my own people. At first, he got very angry, as did his father and mother, but I kept on pleading with them, telling them that I wished to see my own people again before I died. I was really ill, and I suppose they could see that for themselves, because one day, after I cried for a very long time, the young Sasquatch went outside and returned with a leaf full of tree gum. With this, he struck down my eyelids again, as he'd done before. Then again, he lifted me to his big shoulder. The return journey was like a very bad dream, for I was lightheaded and in much pain. When we recrossed the wide river, I was almost swept away. I was too weak to cling to the young Sasquatch, but he held me with one big hand and swam with the other. Close to my home, he put me down and gently removed the tree gum from my eyelids. When he saw that I could see again, he shook his head sadly, pointed to my house, and then turned back into the forest. My people were all wildly excited when I stumbled back into the house, but they had long ago given up on me. But I was too sick and too weak to talk. I just managed to crawl into bed, and that night I gave birth to a child. The little one lived only a few hours, for which I have always been very thankful. I hope that never again shall I see a Sasquatch. There is another story out there, and I found it many, many years ago, I think on Bobby's site, and I've never been able to find it again. And if you know this story, if you could send it me, I'd be incredibly grateful. And it's kind of a tale told by an elderly lady. She laments on what happened in her youth. And she said that she was picking brambles in a bramble patch, and she was taken by a young Sasquatch. He had a female Sasquatch that was very interested in him, but he was interested in the human girl. And the female Sasquatch on occasions would attack her. And eventually he took her as a mate. And a young child was born. And she lived with him there for many, many years and raised the child. And she was homesick, and long homesick, and she wanted to go back. And I can't remember if he took her back, he allowed her to go back, or she escaped. But what I do remember is at the end of the tale, she left a child behind, I should add. At the end of the tale, she was incredibly sad because she realised after a number of weeks of being away from them that she wanted to go back. And she wanted to see the child, and she couldn't find them. And she couldn't find her way back to the area where they had been. And she grew very old and very sad. And each day would visit the bramble patch and shout out his name in the hopes that he would hear her. I'm just taking my meds, just 1 second. There we go. And yeah, so if you know that story and you've heard it before, would you get in touch with me and let me know? Because I'd love to share it with everyone. Now, would it surprise you to know that England has its very own story about a wild man and a maid who bore him a child in 18th century Dorset? Now, we call it the Yellowham Woods. Back then, it was the woods of Yallam. And there is a report written down in a law book about a young maiden who was put before the judge for being with child. And she said, "'Twas not my fault, Your Honour. It was the wild man of Yallam." And if you look up the Woodwose and the Beaver, well, I think it's the Woodwose and the Badger, actually, you'll find this poem. And it's the Maid and the Wild Man of Yallam. She stole away when the night was still, wearing her prettiest clothes, up to the beaches on Yellowham Hill, to meet with the wildwood wolves. Fierce he was and covered in hair, with a gleam in his ancient eye. He beckoned her into his leafy lair with a smile that made her sigh. At morn she rose with blushing cheeks and fled home to her father's mill. She tarried there some 40 weeks, what then went back on Yellowham Hill. She climbed up with a green-haired child and came down alone from the Woosie's wild. Until next time, thank you very much. Good night.